Hello, I'm Dr. Amy H. Sturgis, and today it is my pleasure to talk about one of my favorite novels by one of my favorite authors. One of the most relevant works we can read right now was written in 1826 by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Set in the 21st century, global pandemic, rapid environmental change, displaced populations, broken political and social institutions, and warfare exacerbating and accelerating all other problems. The Last Man has everything. It is a beautiful, moving, thought provoking portrait of what it means to be human while living in unprecedented times. I told you it was relevant. And in June 2025, it will be my honor to offer a space module, a hybrid module, 4 lectures, 4 live discussions, exploring The Last Man. And today, it is my delight to give you a glimpse into that module, to give you an introduction to The Last Man. So let's meet The Last Man by Mary Shelley. The Last Man is a pioneering work of ecocriticism, anticipating climate change and ecological upheaval. It's also plague literature, both responding to the centuries-old tradition of plague stories and bringing pandemic literature forward into the new age of modern science fiction. It's dystopian literature, issuing a warning, calling for action. And it's post-apocalyptic literature. I mean, it's right there in the title, right? It gives you its main premise, the last man. It's a scathing political attack on institutions and leaders, not only incapable of meeting great challenges, but in fact actively making them worse. In short, it's a philosophical novel of big ideas. And yet, it's also deeply personal. It's an autobiographical novel. Why? Because Mary Shelley writes herself into the future she's imagined. She is Lionel Verney, our point of view character, our last man. And she also includes other characters who represent real life people she loved, such as her husband, Percy Bysshe Shelley, and her friend, Lord Byron. The novel asks us to ponder the personal as well as the political. It's also, perhaps surprisingly given the topic, a work of great hope. It's no wonder that the novel has received renewed attention recently. In fact, in just the last year, both a new edition of The Last Man from Penguin Classics and a new critical work by political scientist Eileen M. Hunt called The First Last Man, Mary Shelley and the Post-Apocalyptic Imagination. Both of these were published. Of her analysis, Hunt writes, and I quote, "This book is for everyone who has suffered isolation and despair. Mary Shelley shows us the way out," end quote. I can't think of a more powerful endorsement for a novel. The Last Man is, in short, the perfect novel to read if you want to think about and process what it means to be human while living in unprecedented times. In our June 2025 space module, we'll be covering the novel over 4 weeks. We'll have a lecture each week and a live discussion each week. And here are some of the questions that we will be pondering together. What is Mary Shelley's view of human nature? How does the novel respond to its own time and also relate to ours? Where does it fit in the traditions of science fiction, plague literature, apocalyptic storytelling, eco-critical fiction? What are Mary Shelley's critiques? What are her fears, her hopes? What are the themes of The Last Man? And why are they inspiring new conversations today? I should note that this is a very accessible novel. You can find a free copy of it at Project Gutenberg online, a free audiobook at LibriVox.org. And there are also multiple critical, academic, editions of the novel. So let's meet the last man, shall we? Let me provide a bit of a glimpse into how we will explore the novel together. First, let me talk a little bit about how the novel came about. Mary Shelley was a British author who lived from 1797 to 1851. She wrote 6 novels, 2 travel books, more than 24 short stories, and a multitude of essays and reviews, as well as editorial work. Her parents were Mary Wollstonecraft and William Godwin. They were 2 of the most important political thinkers of their age, and they knew, corresponded with, and were in conversation with most of the others. William Godwin was an anarchist political thinker. He wrote works of political thought like Inquiry Concerning Political Justice in 1788, and novels of political thought, such as Things as They Are or The Adventures of Caleb Williams from 1794. Mary Wollstonecraft was a feminist political thinker, and she wrote works of political thought such as A Vindication of the Rights of Woman from 1792, and novels of political thought such as Maria or The Wrongs of Women in 1798. Mary Shelley, as their daughter, was a devoted, lifelong student of their works and ideas. And just like them, she prioritized topics related to reason, morality, justice, and human rights. Very importantly, she learned from both of her parents how to express philosophical ideas through fiction. The Last Man is, in part, a thoughtful response to both of her parents' philosophies. Also, by the age of 16, Mary Shelley had fallen in love with one of the great big R romantic poets, authors, and essayists of the era, Percy Bysshe Shelley. She ran away with him, and eventually she married him. And she became a part of a circle of artistic creation at the heart of the Romantic movement. In the famous Year Without a Summer, for example, that was 1816, she and Percy, along with Lord Byron, their friend, a rock star of his time in terms of literary success, his doctor, John Polidori, and her stepsister, Claire Clairmont, they all spent time together at the Villa Diodati on Lake Geneva in Switzerland, where, among other things, she wrote Frankenstein while she was still a teenager. I want to emphasize that Mary Shelley was both very young, exposed to the poetry and passion and artistry and imagination of the Romantics, and also by personality and upbringing, really the adult in the room among these rock stars. They were both self-involved and rather self-destructive. She was very interested in the fact that, well, the flip side of liberty is responsibility, you know? And so she was the one who was sort of the adult in the room. But they all together made an unconventional group of self-exiled found family members. And she loved Percy and she loved her friends. Together, they lived and breathed ideas. But by 1824, when she was 26, she had suffered unimaginable loss. She had lost her mother, her half-sister, Percy Shelley's first wife, for which Mary Shelley felt tremendous guilt. Her friend, Dr. Polidori of their Villa Diodati romantic circle, her stepsister's little daughter. She had lost 2 of her 3 little children with husband Percy Shelley, and she had also suffered a late-term miscarriage that had nearly killed her. And while she was still recuperating from this, her husband, Percy Shelley, drowned in a boating accident. And that made her and her friend, Lord Byron, the last authors standing of that Villa Diodati romantic circle. And that's when she began The Last Man. She wrote in her diary, which at this point she called her Journal of Sorrows, quote, "The last man, Yes, I may well describe that solitary being's feelings, feeling myself as the last relic of a beloved race, my companions extinct before me, end quote. She wrote that on May 14th, 1824. And on the very next day, she received news that Lord Byron was dead. So then she wrote, quote, "This then was the coming event that cast its shadow on my last night's miserable thoughts. Byron had become one of the people of the grave, that innumerable conclave to which the beings I best loved belong. I knew him in the bright days of youth, when neither care nor fear had visited me, before death had made me feel my mortality, and the earth was the scene of my hopes." End quote. It's almost hard to imagine the position in which she found herself, all alone then, at the age of 26, to raise her young son. She decided to write through her grief, her isolation, her loneliness, her loss. And this is why, in her 2024 analysis, The Last Man, political scientist Eileen M. Hunt writes, quote, "This book is for everyone who has suffered isolation and despair. Mary Shelley shows us the way out," end quote. That's what she means. How did Mary Shelley do this? How does she show us the way out? She did this by writing through her loss and writing herself into the future in The Last Man. In The Last Man, Mary Shelley casts herself as the lone survivor, Lionel Verney, and key figures in her life appear in fictional form. Her husband, Percy Shelley, is Adrian, for example, and Lord Byron is Lord Raymond. She can memorialize them, idealize them, but also at a step remove, analyze, and even criticize their positions. She can, in effect, work through her thoughts about these figures and the mark they left on the world. As with her parents' philosophies, she can test the ideas, respond to them, even push back against them, while also grieving for the people behind the ideas, the world she lost. Now, let me talk a bit about the novel itself. It's all there in the title, folks. It's not a mystery. There's no big plot twist you won't see coming. Our main narrator, Lionel Verney, is the last man. Therefore, everybody dies. There, I said it. It is what it is. And it's sort of the whole point. That said, the first thing that is useful to know is there is an introduction to the novel. It has an introduction that's part of the autobiographical aspect of the story. It starts in 1818 in Naples, and that was a real trip that Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley took in 1818. They looked for the Sibyl's Cave, the place where the priestess of the ancient oracle of Apollo foretold events. Now, in the novel, the unnamed narrator and the unnamed narrator's companion, on their trip, they find leaves, and the leaves have a story written on them. The narrator then pieces together. And this is a story about the late 21st century. And that story comprises the rest of the novel, thus creating a kind of time travel, found manuscript frame for the rest of the novel. Or, if you prefer to read it this way, prophetic words, anticipating what will happen in the future. And hey, that's appropriate for an oracle's cave. It's worth noting that the idea of prophecy or a warning tied to the idea of an oracle, this also connects to the idea of this novel as a dystopian project. It links The Last Man to the dystopian tradition of science fiction storytelling about worlds gone wrong, right? Implying warnings. These warnings can go one of two ways. If you don't do something, this could happen. Or if you don't stop what you're doing, this could happen. But either way, a call to action. And that call to action also implies hope. There's no point in issuing a warning if it's too late to reverse course. So while we're acknowledging The Last Man as a pioneering work, its role in dystopian science fiction storytelling absolutely deserves to be recognized. Okay, so that introduction set in 1818 sets up the rest of the story. The main body of the novel is set in the 21st century, and it has three main parts. What critic Muriel Spark, who is also a great novelist in her own right, you may know Spark from works such as The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, called three futuristic pictures. In our space module in June 2025, we will cover each of these three parts in a dedicated week. Then in the final week, we will cover the novel as a whole. Eileen Hunt compares Mary Shelley's greatest works in The First Last Man. And there she says, quote, both Frankenstein and The Last Man are concerned with delineating the tragic emotions and unjust social consequences associated with the repeated human failure to make peace, share love, and care for others in the world at large. The existential and global terror of The Last Man derives from its slow and devastating exploration of the personal and political betrayals that exacerbate war, corruption, and a plague that appears to leave a lone human survivor who lives to write the history of the near extinction of his species, end quote. I think that last sentence really hits the nail on the head. War, corruption, and plague. That neatly sums up the three parts of the novel, The Last Man, I think. The first part of The Last Man sets up a kind of family story of the main character, Mary's character, Lionel, starting out as a wild child and gaining education, reason, and understanding. And it also focuses on the Lord Byron character, Lord Raymond, who finds domestic happiness and has the opportunity to help shape and lead his nation successfully. But in the end, he takes part in a disastrous war. Now, that war starts out in a seemingly justifiable way, as a war of independence and self-determination. But it becomes, well, twisted into an aggressive war of conquest. Adrian, the Percy Shelley character, is willing to go and fight with Raymond to support a just fight for freedom. But he pulls back when he realizes that it is becoming more. It's about ego and expansionism. Let us not deceive ourselves, Adrian says, pointing out that the enemies they're fighting are human beings too, as brave as and as capable of suffering as their allies. Adrian goes on to say, quote, all this has a different effect upon Raymond. He is able to contemplate the ideal of war, while I am sensible only to its realities. I cannot follow, for I do not sympathize in their dreams of massacre and glory, end quote. By the end of the first part of The Last Man, we see the families, the relationships, all that the characters have built, all that the characters stand to lose, imperiled, wasted because of those dreams of massacre and glory. And as we learn later, one of the many, many tragic effects of warfare is that it is accelerating the uncontrolled spread of a global pandemic. Then we move on to the second section of the novel. It focuses on, to use Hunt's term, corruption, and it represents, to use Spark's description, quote, the fanfare of political intrigue attempting to justify itself in the face of encroaching disaster, end quote. To put it another way, we see leaders and institutions, political, religious, and social institutions, not just failing to avert crisis, but in fact making everything worse, as war, famine, disease, and cataclysmic environmental changes shake not only England, but the world. Contrasted with a few powerful, inspiring examples of hope, and of the main character's search for meaning and morality in the face of division, violence, and increasingly certain death. As the Mary Shelley character Lionel notes, quote, "I spread the whole earth out as a map before me. On no one spot of its surface could I put my finger and say, here is safety," end quote. But although disease and weather and nature are involved, these are very much human-made disasters. As Lionel says, quote, "I turned to the coarse-strewn earth and felt ashamed of my species," end quote. This isn't just destruction, then, it's self-destruction. And Mary Shelley's critiques and call-outs here are eerily prescient and insightful. And presented as they are through these characters, the novel invites empathy. It invites leaps of imagination. And perhaps most remarkably, given the subject matter, the novel also invites hope. In fact, the biggest takeaway from The Last Man is hope. In the third part of the novel, the population dwindles to, it seems, one. Lionel struggles with and ultimately accepts loss, yet still seeks to understand what it means to be human. Quote, "If my mind cannot acknowledge that all that is right, yet since what is must be, I will sit amidst the ruins and smile. Truly, we were not born to enjoy, but to submit and to hope," end quote. At one point, Lionel says, quote, "We were in an empty world happy," end quote. With a population of only 3, thinking of being mindful of the beauty of the world around him, feeling the wonder of each moment, not taking anything for granted, knowing he should store those memories for later when he would need them. This mindfulness, this gratitude, this sense of wonder, great life lessons, I think. And in the end, there is still hope in the face of a planet that seems to be not only surviving, but actually thriving in the absence of people. Quote, "But it was still possible that, could I visit the whole extent of Earth, I should find in some part of the wide extent a survivor. Methought the seaside was the most probable retreat to be chosen by such a one. I would, with a few books, provisions, and my dog, embark in one of these and float down the current of the stream into the sea," end quote. Still looking for survivors. He's got his books, provisions, and his dog, and he's out to see the world. Now remember, this is a prophecy. In real life, Mary Shelley is giving this to us in 1826. But in the logic, the internal logic of the novel, we are getting this through an 1818 discovery, right? That story written on the leaves. It provides us warnings about warfare, corruption, and plague, about our own hubris and glory seeking, about our propensity not to take responsibility for our actions, including ignoring our responsibilities to our environment and to our fellow human beings. And this includes taking responsibility for ourselves. There's a great line in the novel, one of my favorites. It's discussing a grotesque cult leader who rises up and assembles this credulous flock of followers who simply want someone to do something. They're just looking for a strong man to take power that they can follow. And the line goes, quote, "Men love a prop so well that they will lean on a pointed, poisoned spear," end quote. Mary Shelley is asking us to examine what we lean on, to think about how we stand, and what we stand for. She's asking us not to be the agents of our own destruction. And again, issuing warnings, that is an act of hope, because you do not warn people when it is too late to make change. All of this is relevant today. And I think it's poignant and beautiful that Mary Shelley took the darkest point in her life, when she was the last person in her own world, and she turned it into a beautiful, achingly poignant, inspiring, challenging, thought-provoking, political novel that speaks to us today. And not only a big ideas novel, but a very personal one. Not only a turning point in genre history, but a voice reaching out through the years, speaking to our experience now. It's an important work, a powerful work, a masterpiece. There you go. I hope I have convinced you to read The Last Man by Mary Shelley. And I hope you will join me in June 2025, when in our space module, Meet the Last Man, we will explore this novel together. Thank you very much.